Okay, welcome back to the Franklin Planner podcast. We are so excited to have a special guest here today. John, are you excited as much as I am?
I think we're lucky to be together. So let's
Definitely.
get into it.
We're joined by a time management innovator and productivity coach, someone that's got some amazing skills. His name is Carl Pullein. How are you doing, Carl?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we are, we've been connecting a couple of different ways. We've got some really cool stories to kind of talk about, but let me just give everybody a little bit of a background on you and at least set them up so they kind of understand, who you are if they haven't already seen you online. Carl's not just another time management expert. He's a visionary behind the groundbreaking program, Time Sector System, and one of the programs we're going to talk about today, the COD Task Management System. But he helps individuals worldwide to master time management and boost productivity. He's been voted a world's top time management professional. He's got a major following online, and he's a longtime advocate of the Franklin Planner system. So it's obviously very serendipitous that we are here together. So there again, Carl, we're so happy to have you here. And you're in what part of the world? So everybody knows.
I'm in South Korea. I've been here for like the last 23 years.
Isn't it amazing the digital tech we've got nowadays? So we can just kind of be talking and riffing at all hours of the day. John just comes back from Hawaii. I'm in Utah. You're out in South Korea. That's great. So happy to have you here. But let's get right into it, John.
Let's do it. Carl, more than anything, I think people would love to hear, people that haven't met you, that we might share this with, and also of your great following. Just, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about your journey and maybe what your mission and your vision is for, you're helping a lot of people. You've done some innovative work. Can you just share with us a little bit about your journey and your background from your perspective?
Yeah. Now, my journey with time management is kind of funny because I actually started that when I was in middle school. Now, when I was in middle school, we didn't have the computer systems we have today. So it was basically a pen, ruler, pencil, and paper. And I used to schedule out my exam revision timetable. And it was brilliant. I mean, I had different colored pens and that timetable was fantastic. My only little problem there was I wasn't actually very good at revision. But I was really good at planning my revision. That one I was really good at. So I realized even as a teenager, I had this kind of fascination with time and time management. But then I joined the workforce and, you get caught up in that exciting world. I think I started in hotel management, where time management itself isn't really much of a thing because you're reacting, because that's how hotels worked back then. It was customers are the king. Or guests are king, and you just reacted. Then I went into sales, and that's where time management started impacting my life. Now, the first 4 years of my working life, I didn't have to worry about time management. You just reacted. Somebody wanted a bottle of wine, somebody wanted an extra pillow. You couldn't plan for any of that. You didn't know any. So it was very reactive. But sales, totally different. You had to do your prospecting, then you had to set up appointments with customers. I mean, I wasn't familiar with anything like this. And I remember my sales manager telling me, he says, "You're probably the most disorganized person I've ever met." And I think that really hit me. And that's when I thought, I need to read about this. I need to read a book. And at that time, Hiram Smith's 10 Natural Laws of Life and Time Management, I think it may have only just come out, but it was only maybe 2 or 3 years old at most. And that was the book that I picked up, and it completely transformed my life. I mean, things I didn't even think about, like governing values, it never occurred to me that would be important. But after reading the book, I went, of course, you need a foundation to build your life on. You can't just go from day to day to day reacting. You need to be more proactive about your life. And that's where it kind of started. And I started using the Franklin Planner. I guess it must have been late 92. And then in 2009, I got my first iPhone, and obviously the excitement of all this digital stuff. And I joined that bandwagon for, a good 10, 12 years. But when I noticed there was something missing. I don't know what it was about the digital technology. It just felt there was a gap. There was something missing. And I remember 2 years ago, it hit me. And that was digital technology has no soul. There's no soul to it. It's just like, here's a list of stuff you've got to do. Here's your appointments. And it's the text on a screen is always the same. It never changes. And so it's just another list of stuff to do. Here's your kind appointments. Here's all your digital notes and documents. I thought, aha, that human side, that soul of planning your day is important. And that was when I kind of had those flashbacks to my FranklinPlanner days, thinking, yeah, let's do an experiment. And last year, I think it was October, I went, okay, let's go out, get a brand new FranklinPlanner, get it set up and run it for 3 months. And well, that was 6 months ago.
That's actually how we kind of connected. And I definitely I think our listeners are going to want to hear that story. I'm curious though, before we get into maybe even your system, was there a pivoting point? You've obviously always had a love for time management, productivity, things like that. But on your journey, like, was there a point you decided to go into, teaching and training and coaching and talking with people and helping them with time productivity as kind of a full-time deal? What was the point
that
that
one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I recently was watching an interview with Brian Tracy, and he was talking about turning points in your life. And there's been a few of those, but the big one for me was coming to Korea. I trained to be a lawyer before I came to Korea, and actually went to work in an office for the first time. Now, if you think about it, I was in hotel management. That's running around a big building, up and downstairs. Then I went into car sales. So that was running around a showroom all day, and you didn't have a set desk. And suddenly I went to university, did my law degree, went to work for a law firm, and suddenly I'm in an office 8.5, 9 hours a day, tied to a desk. And I went, this is not for me. And, having spent 6 years training to be a lawyer, I'm thinking, this is a mistake. So I went, okay, time out. And I thought, what can I do? I've got a degree now. I thought, let's go to Korea to teach English. Now, back when I came here, what was 2002, the reason I chose Korea is because beer, being English, we like our beers. Beer was it worked out at something like £1 a pint. And like in England, we were paying £4 a pint. So I said, okay, Korea's good enough for me.
That's random.
No, I was very lucky because almost within the moment I landed in Korea, I just fell in love with the place. It is just an amazing, dynamic country. It's just brilliant. But my reason for coming to Korea was nothing more than just, well, beer's cheap, so everything else must be quite cheap.
Well, you were a pretty random soul, but you were driven. You just had the ability to do what you felt like doing, which is ironic that it's time management you went into. So keep going. What were you? Yeah. How did you pivot into that?
And I think it was within the first 3 months of being in the classroom teaching people that suddenly I was coming home buzzing every night. I mean, it never happened to me before. Every night I was coming. We finished at 9:30. It took me like 3 hours to calm down. I was buzzing. And we were starting classes at 6:30 the next morning. So I wasn't getting much sleep. And yet that buzz, and it was because I was in a room helping people. And I could see I was helping people. I could feel it. And you were getting people say, oh, thank you so much. You've just made this so much easier for me. I've struggled all my life with English, and you've made it fun, and you've made it. And I remember my boss saying, you're very much into edutainment, like educating and entertaining at the same time. And I thought, oh, I like that. And so I just fell in love with teaching, and it became pretty obvious, I would say about 2012, that, my passion for like time management was still there. I was still reading all the books that came out, reading all the articles, watching YouTube videos. And I thought, well, maybe I need to start writing about this. So 2015, I started my blog and wrote every week I still write every week on my blog. Then I started, 2016 was the YouTube channel. In 2017, I started my podcast. So I kind of staggered it. And now I've got these 3 things because I needed to put in place the processes. The first time you do a YouTube video, it's going to take you 2 weeks to do it. Now I can, roll off a YouTube video, and 2 or 3 hours later, I'm handing it over to my video editor. But when I'm doing it on my own, it's 2 days, it's solid.
It's interesting because, John, I'm curious what your thoughts on this. So it's interesting because, Carl, you've always had this fascination and love for the principles, and you caught the vision of Hiram's book and some things, but you love to teach, and yet you are living example of someone who was pretty directional with what they love to do, purpose driven, and in time management. It's literally what we try to talk about on this podcast. And so you have been driving your purpose through principles that are also tied to time management. But John, that's crazy that he is actually like a case study example of putting both in play, right? Your principles and your time management.
It is. I was thinking as Carl was talking of kind of the eighth habit. One of our other key partners, founders, Stephen R. Covey, Carl, I know you've done some work with his work when he wrote that eighth habit, and that was really finding your voice. I feel like as you were teaching, helping people, you were finding your voice. And I'm curious to know, as it relates to, as you kind of leaned into this and you were helping people and you focused on, it sounds like helping people succeed, create, their best life. And we talk about that a lot on this podcast. I'm interested to know, as you've been working with people through these different mediums, what are some of the main obstacles? I guess you could say either goals that people are trying to achieve, or you could say problems or obstacles that they are encountering relating to their goals, relating to time management, relating to just this area. I'm curious to know what continued to give you inspiration that you were helping people solve. What problems were they coming after?
I think today the problem is probably a little bit more different from what it was in the 1990s. But today it's like people, probably this is going to sound a bit harsh, but people want too much. And this is one of the reasons why when I established my areas of focus, or governing values, if you like, was like, okay, what's really important to you? And I think what's happened is, last year I was also reading every single time management book from the 20th century. I think I got back as far as the 1950s. I can't remember the title of the book, but I was trying to read them all to see if there was any common denominators. And if you read those books from particularly the 60s, 70s, and 80s, so when we were moving into the office and out of the factory, if you like, what was happening is that people were pretty clear about what they wanted to do. I want to be the CEO. I want to be the director. It wasn't so much entrepreneurship. It was a word apparently, but it wasn't as common as it is today. But now we're living in a world where I say, well, I want this, I want to start my own business, but I want to start multiple different businesses, and I want to have a happy family, and I want to have this house in the Bahamas, and it's like, I want, but nobody's sort of saying, okay, you can have all those things, but you got to step back first and figure out, well, how are you going to get from where you are today to where you want to be? How do you close the gap? And that's the bit I think today that I've noticed that people are missing. They've got these dreams and aspirations, which is fantastic. I think it's probably quite natural for human beings to have that forward thinking about what we want. But then they're missing that key part of saying, well, here I am today. This is where I want to be. What do I need to do to close the gap? And and then you've got all the distractions that go on in the world today that wasn't around. I mean, I find it fascinating that, people were reading the newspaper in the morning, and that was it. That's all they did, and they'd watch the evening news at night on TV. But it was like 2 touch points for the daily news. But today, you watch people on the train or on the bus. It's like constant.
Yeah, it's interesting because to John's point and what you just said, people are so pushed and caught up in what's going on in the digital age that they're just worried about being. And I'm curious to ask you this question, and then we can talk a little bit about your system. They're so caught up in just productivity and management and time that they don't step back to actually, like we talk about here, lead your life, direct your life. You're trying to be productive for what purpose? And so I'm curious, I want to talk about your system because you have this amazing, you found some timeless ways to create systems for people to manage their time and productivity. And maybe we could talk about your COD system, but I also want you to maybe you have a thought on differentiating between task and time management and productivity, or does that work into your system? Do you notice that there's people that struggle with different parts there, right? Like managing their time versus productivity. And maybe that's also a segue if you'd like to talk a little bit about one of the systems you put together, this COD Task Management System.
Well, time management and productivity these days are just words that get bandied around online. And I think that the true definitions of them, I mean, there are definitions and there's probably clear definitions, but the big thing that I would say to people, which in a way that anyone can understand it, is stuff coming in is never going to stop. And there's a great story of when Queen Elizabeth passed away. She passed away in the afternoon. But that morning, she still had to sign her papers, do the government boxes. Her civil servants made sure because in the UK, all government ministers, prime ministers, and the monarch get this red leather box full of papers that they've got to sign or read or review. She still had to do that on her last day. Now, she died, I believe, of something like a blood cancer. It was something similar to that. So she must have known that her days were numbered, so to speak. But yet she still had to do her boxes. Now, she was very diligent. I'm pretty sure she could have said, no, not today, but she didn't. She still did them.
Wow.
Now, the thing is, that reminded me of something that I realized is stuff coming in is never going to stop. Emails coming in, never going to stop. Slack messages, team messages, never, ever going to stop. So you can't control it. It's out of your control. The one thing, though, that is a constraint, and I love constraints because they force you to be creative, is time. You only get 24 hours a day. And there's certain principles there that as a human beings we need. We need to sleep. I know it's inconvenient, but we do need to sleep. We need to eat. So we need to get those in. And realistically, you've probably only got about 14 hours at most to actually do work if you wish. I wouldn't necessarily advise people to be working 14-hour days every day, but that's really all you're playing with. You can't change the fact that stuff will come in because that's not within your control. But you can control what you do with your time. You can make decisions about, okay, I'm going to get 8 hours sleep every night. I'm going to spend 3 hours with my family. I'm going to take my kids to the park every day. I'm going to walk my dog every day. You can make those decisions. And equally, I mean, if you get a little bit more down into the weeds, I always say, look, just in the past, in the 20th century, we didn't have email, but we were writing letters. And they wrote letters almost every day. Charles Darwin, for example, I think his time was between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. He'd sit down in these, I think they called it a parlor. I can't remember what a parlor is, but anyway, he sat down in the parlor, which had a table and a chair, and he would write his letters every day, respond to letters. It was just something we did, and it was a joy. But today you talk about, replying to email, and people say, oh, I'm going to reply to email. You think, we never used to be like that. People were, they were responding, but they eked out time for it every day because they knew if they didn't, it's just going to pile up and just become an overwhelming mess.
Well, so, I want to add something because I like your point there. It's kind of back to what John said. You're right. It's never going to stop. I think, and John had kind of asked the question, where do you see most people struggling? And I think I have seen as well, if you don't have purpose behind how you're living your life, if you don't have a reason, a direction, then it's much more difficult to handle all that stuff coming in than if you actually have clarity on what you're doing in your life. Is that maybe safe to say with the clients you've been seeing that have direction, they have a better strength in handling all that time and stuff? Or is that one of those key ingredients that you find people have helped them?
Yeah, that's the bit I generally have to untangle, is to try and get people to stop trying to manage tasks because you can't control that, and start managing what they're doing with their time. And with that, I always say, start with you first. Don't start with your work. It's very easy to start with work because that's where we normally identify where the overwhelm is. But if you don't sort yourself out first, you're just going to feel very unfulfilled, very dissatisfied. And that's when you get that low levels of anxiety, which is deadly, long-term stress and the illness that will come from that. You first got to, what do you want? I've listened to many of your podcasts already, and I know that John talks about, what do you want? That is the key question first. And some people will tell you, I don't have time to think about that. And you said, well, you'll never have time if you don't figure that bit out first.
One of the reasons, John, right, why we're doing the podcast, because we're like, we want to be up in your face, making sure we remind you there's a reason you're actually here on Earth, trying to work, trying to create a living. It's not about being productive. right?
Mm.
So, John, I don't know if you want to comment on that, because that is literally why we decided to start this, right?
It is. And I think, Carl, you have really touched on something that people know what matters to them. And like you say, we've done a lot of research, and I think you have too. And you realize the power of goals are there, the power of a vision or mission, and yet a really small percentage of people, because there's a whirlwind out there going on in life, if they can just take some time to figure out who matters most, what matters most, and you've done that. Have with your system before. I think we want to ask you about the whole digital story and your experiment. But Carl, would you just comment about anything you'd like to say about your innovative system, the principles of it, the fundamentals? I would love to hear you just take a minute on it, and then people that are part of your amazing community know where to get it. But people that we touch will be able to know where to go for that. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah,
I was going to say, John, that's a great point. Let's actually break it down for our listeners, if you would, John. Your COD system, task management system, help us kind of break that down.
So this came about when, again, going back to my researching into, well, what are the fundamental basics of all great productivity systems? It's one of the reasons why I read all these old books, fascinating books, but they all had these three underlying principles. What they added to them was different because each person's coming at it from a different point of view. But there was three things. First of all, you got to collect stuff that's coming your way. You need to have a way of collecting that stuff that you trust. If you don't trust your collecting system, it's going to fail because you're going to be worried about what you need to do. And I don't know if I think FranklinPlanner still does this. I don't know if people can see this. This is what a little notebook, and it fits nicely in an inside coat pocket and stuff, and you can carry this around with you. This is a great idea for a collecting system. I call it the ubiquitous collection tool. This is one of them, but it can be something as simple as like a pocket notebook with a pen attached to it, or if you like the digital world, it can be your phone. But you need to have a way of collecting your thoughts, your ideas, the thing. Oh yes, I need to do that. I need to do this. I need to do that. This is that part of like externalizing it instead of letting it float around in your head, waking you up at 3 o'clock in the morning going, oh, I forgot to do that. You don't want that sort of stuff. So collecting is really important. Writing it down is just the best way to externalize all that stuff that's coming at you. But then the next step, which is what a lot of people kind of forget to do, is organize that stuff. That's the O part of COD, organize. What does it mean to you? What do you need to do? So I have like three basic questions. What is it? What do I need to do? And then at the next level would be, when am I going to do it, if at all? So that organizing, going through those questions, what is it? Oh, it's a thought about buying a printer. What do I need to do? Oh, I need to research printers. Okay, so when am I going to do that? I'm not going to do that in the middle of a call. I'm not going to do that in the middle of working on a project. I just need some time to just figure out what's the best printer for me. So you run these questions. What is it? What do I need to do? When am I going to do it? Now, for me, research I'd probably do in the evening, sitting on the sofa. Then it doesn't feel like work. But everyone's got their own ways of doing that. So what is it? What do I need to do? When am I going to do it? And the final bit is do it. The do bit. Now, the bit kind of like the encompassing, or if you like, the bit that sandwiches it all together is you want to be you're going to be collecting all day because that's random. But the bit, and this was addressing one of the problems I had with a lot of people, particularly around about 2015 to 17, when the productivity apps were kind of exploding. People were spending like 50 to 60% of their day just organizing their stuff. Well, now when you expand that time, there's only one place that you're taking it away from. You're taking it away from doing the work. So one of the bits that I emphasize in the COD system is to say, look, you've got to try and get to the point where 95% of your time is doing this stuff and just 5% of your time organizing it, which roughly equates to about 15 to 20 minutes a day. Now, if your system's set up correctly, whether it's paper or digital, it doesn't matter. it's actually very easy to organize your stuff in 20 minutes a day.
It's interesting you say that because I think so many people have lost the idea. Digital is supposed to make us more free, more successful, more productive. All it's really done is made most people think they could take on more. And so
Yes.
by having that simplicity, and John, I know you would agree with this, it's the simple principles that actually make your life better, not adding more and taking more complexity. And so this COD system, the collect, organize, and do it system, may sound simple, just like many of the timeless principles we talk about, but there's a reason that it's supposed to be simple, right?
Well, there's a story that Hiram Smith puts in his book about somebody calling him saying, "Hey," a big CEO of a big company calling him saying, "Hey, I've heard of your great system. I want you to come and teach my executive team." I said, "But we're all busy at the moment, so can we talk about it again in 6 months' time?" And Hiram Smith says, "Yes. What time do you want me to call you?" He said, "What do you mean? What time do you want me to go? It's 6 months now. Just call me in 6 months." "No, I need a time and a day." And Hiram's talking about writing this down in his planner, and he's explaining about how you use the planning folders and everything. And on that day at 7 a.m. in the morning, he calls him, the executive, and he goes, "Oh," I think he used an expletive word. "You told me to call you at 7 a.m. on this day 6 months ago." And it's going, "Yeah, okay."
Well, I tell you, there's a simplicity, isn't there, John, in just putting something down and being able to walk away from it and know
Yeah,
that
but
it's
if you
in your
think
system.
about, though, the mechanics of that is collect. I've now committed to calling this guy at 7 a.m. in 6 months' time. Collect it, put it into your system, and then organizing it. That means, oh, okay, I've got to call this guy at 7 a.m. in 6 months' time. Let's go forward in my calendar, write it in my calendar. The notes that I made about what this guy wants is in my plan. It's perfect. It's exactly what the COD system. I mean, it can work with the FranklinPlanner. It can work with a digital system. It's, if you don't collect it, think of all the opportunities you're going to miss.
Carl, what have you told a story before we got on about connecting with Franklin Quest at the time early, and how somehow you were, I think you were working at a hotel then. You had interest there. What have you noticed as you've gone along in the cool work you've done? And like, what principles have you seen that you think are timeless? So you'd say, this COD system, whatever tools you use, what principles would you say are some of those timeless ones that system is built on, that you've just seen time and time again? People benefit. I mean, they succeed if they keep this principle in mind behind those approaches. What jumps out to you?
The thing that jumps out to me is writing it down. That's the one that I know. Again, it's very, very simple. You don't need to be rocket scientists to do this. I mean, it's write it down. One of my kind of interests is like Formula One, and there's Red Bull CEO Christian Horner. He's done 2 videos on his YouTube channel, like a day in the life of a Formula One team CEO. And one was from 2012, and one was done, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago. One thing I noticed was when they have been recording him in a meeting with one of his leadership team, Christian Horner doesn't have an iPad on his desk or a laptop or a phone. He's got an A4 notebook with a very nice pen, which is one of the other beauties of using pen and paper, by the way. Is the pens out there are just fantastic. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, 2012, 2023, 24, he hasn't changed that system. And it suddenly struck me, I thought, yeah, we're losing sight of what computers are meant for. They're meant to help us. So I think like a lot of my output, I need a computer. I post a blog post, I write a newsletter, I do a podcast, I do a YouTube video. All that needs technology. But the planning side of things, the meeting side of things, actually handwriting these things down. And I know, John, you mentioned in a previous episode about it lights up the whole brain. I mean, that connection between a pen, your wrist, your fingers, it lights up your whole brain. If you think about what a keyboard does, it's just tap, 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 tap. That's not lighting up much in your brain. And also, the big thing I noticed is it forces you to edit.
Mm.
And when you're planning, you
Yeah.
don't want to be editing. You just got to let it flow. You get those red lines or green lines under your grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes. That does not matter when you're planning. That's
Right.
that's the editing part. And I think those are the big things that I've noticed, certainly in recent years, is because we're beginning to think technology can run our lives completely. And I hear about, I've tried one of those AI calendars. And now I like to exercise, but I'm not very good at exercising in the morning. I get a bit lightheaded. So I prefer to exercise in the afternoon. But one of these AI calendars said, "Oh, you're busy today. You must do your exercise at 6 a.m." I'm going, that's not going to happen. And the other thing is, AI won't know if I've got flu. It won't know if I had a fight with my wife this morning. It doesn't know any of that. Only I know that. And I can then manually adjust my calendar accordingly. So I think we're losing sight a little bit of, we're thinking technology can run our lives. And actually, that's the last thing you want to run your life. You should be running your life.
Yeah, just a tool. And you're right. And the other thing it's missing is, the idea that it will never have that vision and clarity and purpose factored into your day to day, which is what we're trying to remind people about. It's funny. I think the $1 million question everyone's going to ask, and I think it's best explained by your experiment, is they're going to say, okay, guys, we get it, right? But how do we merge digital and planner or paper and planning? How do we balance those? And one of the main purposes John and I wanted you on the podcast is you started that experiment a little while back where you're like, hey, I'm going to go back to my Franklin Planner. And I love that you said, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know what's going to happen, but you've been doing that now. Tell us about your experiment and then what you learned from that, or what your conclusions are becoming or are for digital and paper.
Well, the biggest change, the biggest difference I noticed was focus. My focus, wow, it just shot up once I went back to the Franklin Planner. Now, you see, I mentioned a moment ago about the digital, it's just text on a screen and you just see it the same and same and same all day. And you become a little bit numb to that. It becomes like, oh God, there's all these tasks, all these tasks, all these tasks. When you sit down with a Franklin Planner or a planner of any sort, paper, and you step away from the screen and you just allow yourself a few minutes just to think, right, what do I need to get done tomorrow? Now, I always advise planning the night before because you sleep better. You also enjoy the evening more because you're not worried about tomorrow. You've done your planning. And the other thing is, I have a zipper binder on my planner, by the way. And when I close it after my planning and zip it up, it's like a ritual to say, my day's done. And I love that feeling. But the thing about the planner is it gets me to step away from that stuff on the screen. The emails are coming in, the text messages coming in. It gets me away from that. I'm on a sofa. My dog sat next to me. My wife is studying because she's gone back to university. So she's studying at the dining table. It's lovely and quiet, but it feels like there's a connection between us all somehow. And I'm just there with my planner thinking, right, what are my most important things tomorrow? What do I need to get done tomorrow? And that has really helped me with my focus. And then when I come through into the office in the morning, it's just like I open up the planner. It's just to the right of me. And I can just say, right, that's the first thing that needs to get done today. Let's get started. When I was
it a bit of, I was going to say, was it a bit of overwhelm that made you do the experiment in the first place? Or what made you decide to do that?
For me, overwhelmed, because I'd kind of figured out that long list of stuff just overwhelms you, but it was something that was creeping in with my clients. That's what I was having to deal with, like 60 to 70 tasks on a task list for the day. I'm thinking, wow, you could never do that with a Franklin Planner because there isn't 60 to 70 spaces there. But you would see it as you were writing all those tasks out in a planner. You would see this is not going to happen. Whereas digital tools doesn't do that. You say you could have 1,000 things for today and it won't warn you that you're not going to be able to do this. But the other beauty of the planner, which I think is the calendar, your day calendar is right next to your task list. And like yesterday, I had like 7 hours of calls. So there's no point in me putting 20 tasks in the prioritized task list because I could see all my calls on the calendar saying, whoa, there's not enough time to do all this stuff. So I think I only had two things. Planning and solitude was at the top, which has been for 30 odd years when I've been using the planner. And then there was just a couple of other things that just needed to be done in between breaks with meetings. And that was, digital technology does not show you that. I say you can throw 1,000 things for your day to day, and it's not going to warn you that this is an impossible day, but your Franklin Planner is doing that. As you're writing it down by hand, you're going, hang on a minute, I'm not going to get all this stuff done. And it stops you from overwhelming yourself.
I love that. I actually, I've been picking up a lot more personal productivity habits from John because of our conversations. And John, I'm curious what your thought is on that, because I think what people have done, because they're so overwhelmed with digital, is they've said, well, they've rationalized it. They've said, well, what's cool about digital is I could throw it all in my calendar and stuff, and then I don't have to think about it till it pops up. But what you're really saying is, I'm not going to think about what I'm doing today, which is the opposite of what you want if you want to create your life. I don't, John, what would you think about that?
Well, I was thinking as Carl was talking, and Carl, you could tell us, and George, I agree with what you were saying there. Each individual has this amazing leader in them. There's nothing that we've found, and it seems like nothing you've found that can, disagree with that. And also, we might even use greatness, potential, but they may be so busy and so focused, overwhelmed, or maybe not even aware of the power of planning or goals or things like that. But it seems like some terminology that we've come across is there are certain jobs to be done. And you told us about some of your early jobs, but the digital technology, Carl, I'm interested to see if you would agree with this. There's some really powerful things related to communication, texting and calls, and also information that digital technology is powerful at and really does a great job. And then, like you said, technology took you away. We've had so many amazing customers. The technology took them away. And then what it didn't do for them was help them really kind of have time to draw out of them, almost self-coaching, their potential, their values, really anchor with weekly goals and vision and mission. And so that all that stuff in your C part coming at you, have a way to sort through that. And as you go into organized and prioritize it, which your system does, and then, act on it. But I'm curious, did your experiment kind of discover, look, here are the few things that digital technology just is amazing for. And here are some amazing fundamentals that writing and planning and thought also that kind of got left and has come full circle for you in your experience. Summarize, if you're willing, like, yeah, this is key and this is key. And what did you find about the way people can combine those for themselves? Is that too long of a question?
No, it's absolutely fine. Yeah. So for me, the way I've kind of landed now is that thinking, planning, paper all the way. But actually, when it comes to, like, for example, the calendar, the way that the world is working today, my coaching clients use a scheduling service. I've kind of blocked out time on my calendar. They can just go in and pick a time and schedule it. I can't do that with my Franklin Planner because I can't just hand them my Franklin Planner and say, pick a time. That's not going to happen. However, what I do is in my planner, I do put in like key appointments, like if my dog's got a grooming session or I'm going to the dentist or the doctor or anything like that. I put those in. And what I like about that is I can actually see the month as a whole. And I can see if I've kind of overcommitted myself that I'm not going to be in the office on too many days or something like that. But the digital system, I find on a day-to-day basis, for meetings particularly, is the calendar's there for me. It's like, when I joined this call, the link that George has sent me was in the calendar invite. So, you can't do that in my planner. You can't write out the link into my planner. So those areas is where I think digital obviously has a huge advantage. It makes communicating fantastic. And as George, you mentioned, I'm in South Korea. You're in Utah. I think, John, you're in Hawaii.
He's back in Utah now.
You're in Utah now. So like
my head's in Hawaii.
Yeah, let's be clear. That's
thousands
great
of
pointing.
miles
Yeah.
between us.
Yeah. You know,
But
you do
digital
make a
brings us
great point.
together.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, the
Um,
digital definitely has its abilities to make you actually be able to be more productive. But, I think, John, your question is so great and your answer as well, Carl, because of this. Most people have not decided where they're going to use digital and where and how they're going to use the
mm,
planning. In your system, like there's a couple subtleties I wanted to point out. You know, thinking and planning, don't try to, I've tried that, force the calendar stuff all in your planner. Adopt a calendar digitally and
mm.
record your primary things on your planner. Maybe collect some things digitally, but put things in writing for thinking and planning. And I think when you are purposeful in how you're going to use digital and writing, you become better at your life and you become more successful. If you're trying to do both, like I've experienced it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I'm using two systems here. No, you're actually clearly defining where digital helps you the best and
Mhm.
where you're missing from the digital here. And to John's point in our earlier episodes, there are some things you haven't thought about between, your brain and your creativity and your thought process and things like that. Because even you, as a YouTuber, influencer, productivity coach and international speaker, you still have to break away. And I noticed you said you had solitude and planning and things on your list.
Mm.
Who even puts that on their list digitally? Nobody.
Nobody does that anymore.
Right?
Actually, there's a great saying. There's a great saying which is "slow is smooth, smooth is fast." I think it's a Navy SEAL saying. Slow
I
is
like
smooth,
that.
smooth is fast. And I think of it in terms of this: if you need to plan, that's slowing. If you need to think, that's slow. When you execute very quickly, and that's doing. Now, for me, doing
Great
something
point.
quickly, that's where technology comes in. I need to communicate with somebody quickly. I need to text my wife because she needs to know something. That's speed. That's all about speed. I'm not going to sit down with a pen and paper and say, how am I going to, put this message to my wife together? You need this to see this or something. But when it comes to planning your life, planning your day, planning your week, planning your year, you've got to start on paper. Don't necessarily finish on paper because maybe the action steps you want to put in digitally, like your calendar appointments, maybe if you like digital to-do list. Yeah, sure. Put that digital, but that's the output of your thinking, and the thinking starts on paper first. And just to give you a really good example of how this works, when I actually started my paper planning experiment early last year. And I thought, right, the best place to do this is start planning my YouTube videos on paper, not digital. I'd always done it on digital first. And I did it, and I tripled my views in a month.
Wow.
I went from an
Wow.
average of 3,000 views a week to 10,000 views a week. I'm going, it can't be just paper. But there was no other change that I'd made. That was the only change I made. And I realized, the paper, you mentioned there, George, about that creativity. That's what was happening. I was being more creative. I was being more fluid with the story, the narrative that I wanted to share. Whereas digital, it was just bullet points. And that doesn't
That's
come across very
crazy.
well in a video.
That's
Carl,
amazing.
you've probably heard of this. You probably read this book, Deep Work.
Yes.
And another point, we'll give references to that. But when you took the time to do that, at least what a lot of our community says is you connect, you're more inspired, your brain actually is working better. And so, you were able to do some deep work about things you were inspired about that you knew others had needs for. And you obviously were able to connect with them. I think that's fascinating. I want to throw one other thing out. And I know that, George, we might be tight on time, but as you guys were talking about the calendar, uh, the things you mentioned about digital, there's really some phenomenal innovation, coordinating schedules and so on. But I wanted to just mention something that we hear a lot in our community: the power of a day, a week, a month. In other words, the calendar itself really is an amazing four-part being on paper, at least related to goals and related, it's a natural day and night way to take what matters to you, who matters to you, and work at that each day so that at the end of the day, and so you're able to say, hey, we didn't get it all done, but what mattered most, we did get done. And so it has both a part of your inspiration and drawing out the brilliance in you, connecting with others and building trust and helping them succeed. That structure that, whoever created this, however we died, the sun comes up and goes down, is also phenomenally integral, is what many have said in our community, to that inspiration, values, and foundation site, in addition to coordination, communication, and digital. So it really is a gift in both these technologies. The paper is a technology. And Carl, I love how you had the courage and creativity to do that experiment. You're super credible. And wow, it's been
I should just, by the way, John, I should just add something to, you mentioned about the calendar and your goals and actually projects as well. One of the things, and this is for all the Franklin Planner users out there, in the calendar I'm using the Montecito pages, but in the calendar, you've got a section down the right-hand side called notes. And what I do is at the top, I write out what are my projects I want to complete this month. And then underneath that, what are my goals this month? Now I'm looking at that. I look at that calendar, not necessarily every day, but I look at it certainly every single week when I'm planning the week. And I look at those things and look at the goals and the projects I want to complete this month. And boy, has that kept me focused. And again, that digital side, when I've tried to do this digitally, it's never worked because they've been hidden. They've kind of disappeared. But every Saturday morning when I sit down to do my planning, I look at that month page view in my planner. I'm going, oh, yeah. Next week, I really must get some work done on that project, or else I'm not going to get it complete. It's been phenomenal to get me focused. I think, why have people forgotten this? Digital just disappears.
That's a point that I really want to highlight for our listeners. Focus. It's really hard to focus when digital gives you everything. Even if it parcels it out, it doesn't parcel out the part that's the most important. So focus is big. I love that you said that, Carl. I want to mention one other thing before we pivot to a couple last questions. I think there's a huge intangible that people might not value, but as they go on in life, they'll wish they had. And that is, you said things like, you're going to get the results. You've gotten more results. You've gotten more productivity. You've gotten more you've shown and proven through your experiment, you can get more out of it. But I want to ask you if you got this, but you said things like, when I zipped up the planner, mentally, I felt like I could set it aside. And I'm curious if you felt that, yeah, you got more results, but did you feel more satisfaction or fulfillment that you were actually driving your life the direction you want as far as purpose versus I'm getting so much, like sometimes I feel like I'm getting 100x done on things, but I could go back and go, but my main stuff, it's not that. So when you did this experiment, you got the tangible done, but was it that sense of fulfillment and also, peace of mind? Like what kind of things there did you experience?
Oh, the fulfillment side of it has gone through the roof, which is probably the reason I should have mentioned this in the actual video that I posted yesterday, is that this is one of the main reasons why I've not stopped. I should have stopped in December. I never did. It's now we're now into
it's
April,
a 3-month deal, right? Yeah.
But it's that sense of fulfillment. And as I mentioned, that zipping up of the planner at the end of the day after I've done my planning for the next day, it's like a little ritual to say my day is done. Now I can just relax. It's no more work. And if I haven't done something, that's fine. I've got next day planned and I can pick up tomorrow, but that's it. So it's like bookending the day. It starts, I'll open up the planner when I come into the office, put it down on the desk. I always write a journal in the morning in my in a separate book, but it's a handwritten journal. That's one of my, make coffee first. That's always essential, but then sit down and write my journal. And it's like 20 minutes of writing my journal. But before I do that, I realize I always open up the planner and just have it to the right of me. And so I'm very aware of what my most important thing. I don't put little routinal stuff in the planner. That's digital. That's fine. I can just check that at the end of the day. Did I take the garbage out? Did I refuel the car? Stuff like that. I mean, I'm not going to put that in the planner. This is like the real stuff that's going to make the day feel fulfilling. And
you do something that most people don't see. And that's what I was trying to get at is because of your phone being one of your biggest, like time management, productivity type tools, people could even leave their office, close their door, go, but you take your digital stuff with you. You were able to block, go shift to a thought, process of organizing, planning, thinking, but then use that to close it off and create your life. And so I got to commend you on that. I mean, John, that's pretty cool, powerful, intangible stuff, don't you think?
I think it's credibility. And Carl, your story is one, where you've been interested in this, you've studied it, you become an expert, you have combined all your different experiences. So it's really amazing. It would be fun if we could do this, if we could gather all of your community into this big Franklin campus that's kind of historical for Franklin West and FranklinPlanner. We have this auditorium called the Hiram Smith Auditorium. We would need a much bigger auditorium to gather all your community there. But it's been cool to hear. I don't know. I would like to thank you and just say, I feel like you've inspired me to, just take a little more time each day, each week, and really for myself, customize and use the strengths of the digital technology. And in most cases, people are way overwhelmed there. So we're not knocking that. We're just saying, and rediscover. If you once, were writing things down, journaling, and really drawing out what's great in you, but also if you haven't done that before, some of maybe those that are younger that just started digital, would just invite people to visit your channels and your sites, those that are from our community, and discover what, you've discovered in your journey. And I'm just really impressed. You've inspired me to lead my life a little more deliberately and to really focus. So thank you for sharing a bit about yourself.
Yeah. And John, I'll make sure that you guys, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but let's make sure I'll put all of your links to the ways people can contact you in our show notes, and I'll make sure that they can go there. But before we go, because I know we're out of time, apologize, because we're going to have to do this again because we want to get into teams, how to lead your
dog
team
is desperate to get outside.
Yeah. So we'll go, but is there any last thought or, comment or direction you want to give people before we let you go?
I think if we relate it to what I've learned with my FranklinPlanner experiment, which is probably no longer an experiment because I'm in totally.
Love it.
But one of the things I would say, and I'm currently thinking about how I can actually communicate this to people out there, but the most important thing is just slow down. Yeah. Technology is going to keep getting faster and faster and faster. Your brain is not going to get faster and faster and faster. The only way that we as a human race is going to cope in the future is to slow down, figure out what's important to you, not try and think what's important to other people. It's what's important to you, and make sure that that's what you're planning for. Because as I said at the beginning, stuff is never going to stop coming in. I've got quite a lot of retired clients who telling me that they're now busier than they ever were when they were working in the workforce. Of course they are. It's just because everything's getting more faster and faster and faster. It has to be done now. No, it doesn't. Slow down.
Great advice. That is great advice for people. Slow down. And we talked before, as we end up here, I want to make sure I make a note to all of our listeners. Carl has an amazing COD system. You can get it for free, absolutely free on his site. So go check it out. Connect with Carl. Learn a little more about his journey, but also because there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that. And we really appreciate, as always, as John mentioned, we want to help individuals to lead their life. We want them to be more productive, but also more fulfilled and passionate. So we appreciate everybody joining us here tonight. Carl Pullein, you are an amazing person. We appreciate your time. And as always, we look forward to talking with you more on the next episode. Have an amazing day.